in the big three, a main character whose whole arc has always been about control. Losing Tara is maybe not the only thing that could have pushed Willow all the way over the edge, but it's certainly the most heartbreaking, both for Willow and for the audience. At the end of her warpath in the season finale, Willow finally internalizes the lessons that Tara's character had been trying to teach her all along. She has inherent value just the way that she is. She can't control everything, and she doesn't need to control everything to never make a mistake in order for the people in her life to still decide to love her. Tara's spirit and everything that she stood for is here with Willow and Xander in this scene. After this, Willow mourns and moves forward. And very importantly, she stays queer in the following season, because her bisexuality was never what caused any of this to happen. Of course, it could have been written differently. Probably should have been written differently given its context in media history. Tara's death caused so much anguish inside of the queer community that to this day there are people who refuse to rewatch that particular episode. But the problem here isn't actually that Tara dies, it's that Willow and Tara were the only story on TV at the time. If the gays on Buffy die on TV, they die in real life, and sapphic representation ticks back down from one couple to 0. And just like always, just like the past 100 years, nobody gets to be happy. And I say what I'm about to say very earnestly, knowing that people have extremely strong opinions surrounding Tara's death. I also say this still disliking that decision for my own selfish reasons, still wishing that the producers had decided to go in a different direction. But was this particular death that bad because it was evil, or was it that bad because it was all we had? I can't help but wonder, in today's world of TikTok edits and commenters clamoring for scraps of doomed Yuri, how a story like this, if it were new, would be received. I actually would take it one step further. I would actually be willing to argue that if Buffy were released tomorrow, there would be people who not only loved Willow and Tara, because people have always loved Willow and Tara, but specifically there would be people who loved how their arc ended, who celebrated Willow's revenge as the female rage of a grieving partner. And I think that most people would still hate season 7 and would still feel pretty bad about the pacing and how fast we moved through that grief and beyond Tara. Also just the existence of Kennedy and her general vibes being so much worse than Tara's vibes. People would still for sure grieve her and feel that loss, miss her, but I think that that would be a separate issue. There would absolutely still be criticisms about Tara's death. Plenty of people would still be mad that she's gone, especially because deaths in Buffy, a lot like deaths in Supernatural, rarely seem to stick for most of the characters. But still, even if just as a thought experiment, I think that there's a good chance that a lot of us would see it very differently. The reason why I feel so confident making that claim about a hypothetical modern Buffy is because of Doomed Yuri, or rather because of the community that's sprung up around Doomed Yuri. It's just so interesting living in a world where there is a real push online for more sad lesbians, as many sad lesbians as possible, actually, as much tragedy and toxicity as we can possibly impart upon the fictional world. And I've been thinking a lot these past couple of months about whether or not that's a bad thing, if this is representative of us as a society regressing in some important way, self-censoring stories that were previously state-censored, telling each other that we don't get to have a happy ending instead of just letting the world around us do the same thing. This is actually the thought that spawned this entire video into existence, this consideration that maybe now we're responsible for burying our own gays. And not to commit too soon to that really annoying video essay nothing burger conclusion that always seems to come to pass in videos like this, but I think that multiple things can be true at once. Doomed Yuri, specifically in the category that we started this video in, that being mainstream Yuri ships in Japanese anime that are exported to a Western audience, is a little bit concerning to me. But it's not concerning to me because it's tragic or because it doesn't hit. It absolutely hits, let me tell you that much. It's concerning because it's still the single story that we get. We don't have a Yuri on Ice, a Yuri Bakudeku. The genre Yuri that would refute this trend tends not to break into the mainstream in the US. And the truth is, not everybody is going to go beyond what's popular. In fact, most people probably won't. So when every story in a genre that reaches us is doomed, that means something. Yuri in fandom, in a weird way, is trapped in substance in 1950s era Hays Code censorship, in 2015 era bury your gays when it comes to what is actually happening to these women in anime. But there aren't nearly as many people upset about it. In fact, everyone seems cool about the way things are. Everyone seems to want it to be even more the way that it is. We are yearning loudly for stories that mirror a relationship dynamic in Japan that traces back to the early 20th century that was so hopeless, so doomed, that it drove pairs of young girls to to suicide. We have become not only fine with, but celebratory of the ephemerality and plausible deniability inside of these relationships, as long as these girls are also gay and pretty and sad in our headcanons, as long as we can make our edits and argue that it's the subtext that matters. We debate about whether the love in these stories is more meaningful because of the way that the characters either refuse to or can't put it into words. And I think it's worth pausing for a second and recognizing that. It's worth thinking about how the way that we talk about Doomed Yuri is inherently going to be in conversation with the way that we have always talked about queer media, the way that these stories have always been presented. But still, that doesn't feel like the whole picture to me. And that's not just me being defensive, because I am also a glutton for punishment, because I also have a massive soft spot, if it's not obvious by this entire video, for Doomed Yuri, because I really do think that there is still something special and different about these ships and about the communities that form to celebrate and mourn them. I could make a whole video on the concept of canon, but I think that stories inevitably change in the hands of their audiences in ways that their writers can't possibly anticipate. And I think that what we're able to find together inside of these communities is just as, if not more meaningful than whatever the writers might have originally intended. It's just as real, honestly, given that it's all fiction anyways, meant to help us understand and navigate our very real lives. It's just as true in Doomed Yuri as it is in real life that tragedy is inevitable, that we'll have to make hard decisions and lose the people that we love. I said earlier that the issue of Bury Your Gays has never been just about dead lesbians, and I meant what I said about how it's also about the lack of other happier endings, but it's also about the lack of queer stories that felt like they were about something more than just tragedy for its own sake. The lack at the time of queer characters who got to have arcs that were about more than just being queer and suffering because of it. And I think Doomed Yuri hits so hard for people in part because these are stories that are about something. And especially with Doomed Yuri that exists outside of the canon, it often feels like both characters have to exist as full individuals within the story. They literally cannot die in punishment for their queerness because, to the writers, they were probably never actually queer. And so you have characters that are pushing each other authentically to grow and change and save the world, and their theoretical relationships are blooming in the eyes of fandom as a result. Even for a character like Ochako, who I would argue is underdeveloped as a primary love interest in My Hero, her potential as a character is most obvious when she's foiled across from Toga. It's easy for fans to see, through their canon rivalry, how the both of them are challenged and made better and more real by the other person. And so it's heartbreaking to see them separated, to see Toga sacrifice her life for Ochako, whether you like them together as a couple or not. Madoka Magica is a tragedy, but it's also about how love can literally change the fabric of reality over and over and over again. It's about how we're willing to fight forever against inevitability if it means we're able to protect